a small, peaceful village surrounded by lush green hills and thick forests, there lived a farmer named Thomas. He was an older man, his hair streaked with gray, and his hands rough from years of hard work under the sun. Thomas wasn't rich, but he was known throughout the village for his kind heart and unwavering dedication to his farm. Every morning he woke up before sunrise, fed his animals, tended to his crops, and worked tirelessly until the stars came out at night. Despite his age, Thomas never complained about the long hours or the back-breaking labor. It was all he had ever known, and he took pride in providing for himself and helping others whenever he could. One day, as part of his weekly routine, Thomas decided to visit the local market. The market was always bustling with activity, vendors shouting to attract customers, children running around playing games, and the smell of fresh bread wafting through the air. It was a lively place, full of color and energy. Thomas usually went there to buy seeds, tools, or supplies for his farm, but this particular trip turned out to be different. As he wandered through the crowded stalls, something caught his eye. A scrawny old horse tied to a wooden post near the edge of the market. The poor creature looked like it had seen better days. Its ribs were visible beneath its dull, matted coat, and its head hung low, as if it had given up hope. Flies buzzed around it lazily, and its eyes, though clouded with exhaustion, still held a flicker of sadness that tugged at Thomas's heartstrings. The trader standing beside the horse didn't seem to care much about the animal's condition. He was a scruffy-looking man with unkempt hair and clothes stained with dirt. A faint smell of ale lingered around him, suggesting he'd been drinking earlier. He barked loudly, trying to convince passers-by to buy the horse, but no one paid him any attention. Most people walked past without even glancing at the pitiful creature. Some shook their heads, muttering things like, "That thing won't last. Another month." Or, "What's the point of buying a horse that can barely stand?" Thomas felt a pang of sympathy as he watched the scene unfold. He imagined how lonely and frightened the horse must feel, abandoned and unwanted among the noise and chaos of the market. Slowly, he approached the trader, who perked up immediately upon seeing a potential customer. "How much for the horse?" Thomas asked, gesturing toward the animal. The trader scratched his chin, sizing Thomas up. 5 silver coins, he replied quickly, naming a price far higher than what such a decrepit horse was worth. Thomas raised an eyebrow. 5? For this? He pointed at the horse, whose bony frame swayed slightly as it shifted its weight. "It looks half dead already." The trader shrugged, clearly not offended by the comment. "Take it or leave it, old man. No one else is lining up to buy it." Thomas hesitated. He didn't need another horse. He already had 2 strong ones that helped him plow his fields and carry heavy loads. Besides, this horse looked like it wouldn't survive the journey back to his farm, let alone pull a cart or do any real work. Still, something deep inside him couldn't bear the thought of leaving the poor animal behind. He pictured it being sold to someone cruel who might mistreat it further, or worse, sent to slaughter. After a moment of silence, Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out 3 copper coins, the only money he had left after purchasing essentials for the week. "This is all I can afford," he said firmly, holding them out, "and I'm taking the horse." The trader stared at the coins, then at Thomas, and finally at the horse. For a brief second it seemed like he might argue, but then he sighed and waved dismissively. "Fine, take it. Good riddance anyway." Without wasting another moment, Thomas untied the rope securing the horse to the post. As he led the frail animal away, he noticed that despite its weakened state, it followed him obediently, almost as if it understood that it was finally free from the trader's neglect. Thomas patted its neck gently, whispering words of reassurance. "Don't worry, buddy, you're safe now." On the way home, Thomas couldn't help but wonder why he had made such an impulsive decision. Buying the horse hadn't been practical. It certainly wasn't going to help with the farm work anytime soon, but somehow it felt right. There was something about the animal's demeanor that intrigued him. Even in its current state, it carried itself with a quiet dignity, as if it had once been majestic and powerful. Its eyes, though weary, held a spark of intelligence that Thomas couldn't quite explain. When they arrived at the farm, Thomas guided the horse to a cozy stable and gave it fresh water and hay. He spent the rest of the evening brushing its coat, removing the dirt and tangles and inspecting its hooves for injuries. To his surprise, the horse seemed to respond positively to his care. It nuzzled against him affectionately, letting out soft snorts of contentment. Thomas smiled, feeling a strange sense of connection with the animal. That night, as he lay in bed, Thomas found himself thinking about the horse again. What had driven the trader to sell it? Where had it come from? And why did it feel so different from other horses he had encountered? These questions lingered in his mind as he drifted off to sleep, unaware that this simple act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. Little did Thomas know, the horse he had rescued out of pity was no ordinary animal. Hidden beneath its worn exterior lay a secret so extraordinary that it defied imagination. But for now, Thomas was simply happy to have given the horse a second chance, and perhaps in doing so, he had unknowingly opened the door to a world of magic and mystery. Over the next few days, Thomas settled into a routine with his new horse. He named it Eldrin, a name that had been passed down through generations in his family, often whispered in old tales of heroes and mythical creatures. Though he wasn't sure why the name came to mind, it felt fitting somehow. Eldrin seemed to respond well to it, lifting its head slightly whenever Thomas called out the name. At first glance, Eldrin appeared just like any other aging horse, weak, slow-moving, and in need of constant care. But as Thomas spent more time with him, he began noticing small, unusual things. For one, Eldrin was surprisingly gentle and intelligent. When Thomas spoke to him, even casually, the horse would tilt its head or blink slowly, almost as if it understood every word. Once, when Thomas accidentally dropped a bucket of water near the stable, Eldrin didn't bolt or panic like most horses would. Instead, he stood perfectly still, watching calmly as Thomas picked up the mess. But it wasn't just Eldrin's behavior that caught Thomas's attention. Strange occurrences started happening around the farm, and though they were subtle, at first they became harder to ignore over time. One morning, Thomas woke up to find all his tools neatly arranged outside the barn. The night before, he had left them scattered across the field after finishing some repairs on the fence. He scratched his head, puzzled. Did I do this and forget? He muttered to himself. But deep down he knew he hadn't. A few days later, something even stranger happened. A storm rolled in during the night, bringing heavy rain and strong winds that knocked over several posts along the edge of the pasture. Normally, this would mean hours of work fixing the damage. Yet when Thomas stepped outside the next morning, he found the fence repaired, not perfectly, but good enough to keep the animals safe. There were no footprints in the mud, no signs of anyone having worked on it. All he could see were faint hoof prints leading back to the stable where Eldrin slept. Thomas tried to brush off these incidents as coincidence or perhaps the result of sleepwalking, though he had never done such a thing in his life. Still, the nagging feeling that something unusual was going on grew stronger with each passing day. Then came the night that truly changed everything. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Thomas noticed that his crops looked healthier than ever. The wheat stalks stood tall and golden, their grains plump and ripe despite the recent drought that had plagued the region. His vegetable garden, which usually struggled during dry spells, was thriving. Tomatoes hung heavy on the vines, and carrots grew fat beneath the soil. Even the chickens seemed happier, clucking loudly as they pecked at the ground. Confused but grateful, Thomas walked over to the stable to check on Eldrin. As he approached, he saw the horse standing quietly in the corner, gazing out at the fields. There was something about the way Eldrin carried himself, a quiet confidence and aura of calm, that made Thomas pause. "What are you, really?" he whispered aloud, half-jokingly. Of course, Eldrin didn't answer, but for a brief moment Thomas swore he saw the horse's ears twitch in response. That same night, disaster nearly struck. A pack of wolves had been prowling the area recently, drawn by the scent of livestock. Thomas had heard stories from neighboring farmers about sheep being attacked and cattle injured. Worried for his own animals, he stayed awake longer than usual, keeping watch from the window of his small cottage. Around midnight, he heard a low growl coming from the direction of the chicken coop. Grabbing a lantern and a sturdy stick, he hurried outside. In the dim light, he spotted a shadowy figure creeping toward the coop, a large wolf, its teeth bared and eyes gleaming hungrily. Before Thomas could react, a loud, piercing neigh split the air. It came from Eldrin, who had somehow broken free from the stable and positioned himself between the wolf and the chickens. The sound was unlike anything Thomas had ever heard, deep and resonant, carrying a power that sent shivers down his spine. The wolf froze, startled, before retreating into the darkness with a whimper. Eldrin stood his ground until the threat was gone, then turned to look at Thomas with those piercing, knowing eyes. For the rest of the night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames, replaying the events in his mind. The fixed fence, the thriving crops, the protective neigh. It was all too much to chalk up to mere coincidence. Something extraordinary was happening, and Eldrin was at the center of it. The next morning, Thomas decided to test his theory. He deliberately left a rake and shovel lying haphazardly in the yard, making sure Eldrin could see him doing so. Then, pretending to go inside, he hid behind the barn and waited. Sure enough, within minutes he heard the soft thud of hooves against the earth. Peeking around the corner, he watched in amazement as Eldrin used his nose and mouth to nudge the tools into a neat pile. It wasn't perfect, but it was clear the horse was trying to help. Thomas stepped out from his hiding spot, clearing his throat to announce his presence. Eldrin froze, looking guilty for a moment, then lowered his head as if bracing for punishment. But instead of scolding the horse, Thomas laughed. A warm, genuine laugh filled with awe and wonder. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" he said, patting Eldrin's neck affectionately. As the days went by, Thomas found himself growing closer to Eldrin. They developed a bond unlike any he'd shared with an animal before. It wasn't just companionship, it was trust, understanding, and maybe even friendship. Thomas often talked to Eldrin while working in the fields, sharing stories about his childhood, his late wife, and the dreams he still held on to despite his age. And though Eldrin couldn't speak, Thomas felt certain the horse was listening. Despite the mounting evidence of Eldrin's mysterious abilities, Thomas chose not to tell anyone about what was happening. Part of him worried that people might think he'd lost his mind. Another part felt protective of Eldrin, as if revealing the truth would put the horse in danger. Whatever secrets Eldrin held, Thomas wanted to uncover them on his own terms. And so life on the farm continued, with each day bringing new wonders and mysteries. Thomas didn't know it yet, but the answers he sought were closer than he realized, and they would lead him on a journey beyond anything he could have imagined. For now, however, he was content to simply cherish the moments he shared with Eldrin, marveling at the magic hidden in plain sight. One stormy night, the kind that made the windows rattle and the trees groan under the weight of the wind, Thomas found himself unable to sleep. The howling gusts and flashes of lightning kept him awake, and after tossing and turning for what felt like hours, he decided to step outside. He grabbed his old coat and lantern, hoping to check on the animals and make sure everything was secure. As he walked toward the field, the rain pouring down in sheets, he noticed something strange. In the distance, standing alone in the middle of the open pasture, was Eldrin. The horse wasn't moving, nor was he seeking shelter from the storm. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his silhouette illuminated by the occasional bursts of lightning. Thomas squinted through the rain, trying to understand why Eldrin would be out there in such weather. Then, as another bolt of lightning lit up the sky, Thomas froze. For a brief moment, he saw it. Eldrin's body glowing faintly, as if bathed in an otherworldly light. It wasn't just a trick of the storm or the reflection of the lantern. The glow was soft, but undeniable, pulsing gently around the horse like a halo. Thomas's heart raced. Was he imagining things? Had exhaustion, finally, caught up with him? Before he could retreat back to the safety of the house, Eldrin turned his head and looked directly at him. But this time it wasn't just the usual intelligent gaze that had intrigued Thomas before. This time, the horse's eyes seemed to pierce straight through him, filled with a wisdom and depth far beyond anything mortal. And then, without warning, a voice echoed in Thomas's mind, not loud or jarring, but clear and calm. as if someone were speaking directly into his thoughts. "You have shown me kindness when others would have cast me aside," the voice said. "I am not merely a horse." Thomas staggered backward, nearly dropping the lantern. His breath hitched in his throat, and for a moment, he thought he might faint. He stared at Eldrin, waiting for the voice to come again, half expecting it to be some cruel prank played by his tired mind. But the words had been real, too vivid, too meaningful to dismiss. I don't understand," Thomas stammered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the storm. "What are you?" Eldrin lowered his head slightly, almost bowing, and the glow around him dimmed until it disappeared completely. The voice returned, softer now, carrying a tone of gratitude and sorrow. "Long ago, I served as a guardian spirit, tasked with protecting the land and its people. My duty was to ensure balance between nature and humanity, to safeguard the harmony of the world. But jealousy led to betrayal. A sorcerer, envious of my power and connection to the earth, cursed me. He stripped me of my true form and bound me to this mortal shell. A horse." Thomas listened intently, his fear slowly giving way to awe. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, yet every word resonated with truth. Eldrin continued, his voice steady and measured. "The curse forced me to wander the world, forgotten and unseen, my strength fading with each passing year. Many humans passed me by, treating me as nothing more than a burden or a tool. But you, Thomas, you saw something worth saving. You showed me compassion when I had none left to give." Tears welled up in Thomas's eyes as he processed the revelation. All this time, the strange occurrences on the farm, the repaired fences, the thriving crops, the protective neigh that scared away predators, they weren't random acts of luck. They were Eldrin's doing, small glimpses of the incredible power he once wielded. "But why tell me this now?" Thomas asked, his voice trembling. "Why reveal yourself after all this time?" Eldrin's expression softened, and though he remained silent for a moment, Thomas could feel the weight of his answer before it came. "Your act of kindness has begun to weaken the curse. By rescuing me and caring for me, you have reignited a spark of my former self. However, the curse is not yet broken. To restore my true form and reclaim my purpose, we must complete 3 trials tied to the elements: earth, water, and fire." Thomas blinked, unsure whether to feel honored or overwhelmed. "Trials? What kind of trials?" "They will test your courage, your wisdom, and your willingness to sacrifice for the greater good," Eldrin explained. "Each trial will bring us closer to breaking the curse, but they will not be easy. You must decide if you are willing to face them alongside me." For a long moment, Thomas stood in silence, the rain soaking through his coat and chilling him to the bone. He thought about his quiet, predictable life on the farm, the simplicity of waking up each day to tend to his fields and animals. Helping Eldrin meant stepping into the unknown, risking danger and hardship for a cause he barely understood. Yet as he looked into the horse's eyes, he knew there was no question. He had already formed a bond with Eldrin, one that went deeper than mere friendship. If anyone could help this noble creature regain his freedom, it was him. "I'll do it," Thomas said firmly, his voice cutting through the storm. "Whatever it takes, I'll help you." A flicker of hope passed over Eldrin's features, and, for the first time since their meeting, Thomas saw something resembling joy in the horse's gaze. "Thank you, Thomas. Your bravery will not be forgotten." With that, the storm began to ease, the winds dying down and the rain slowing to a gentle drizzle. Eldrin stepped forward, nudging Thomas gently with his nose. Together, they returned to the stable, where Thomas wrapped a blanket around the horse and sat beside him, lost in thought. Over the next few days, Thomas prepared for the journey ahead. He packed supplies, a sturdy backpack filled with food, water, and tools, and made arrangements for his farm. He told his neighbors he'd be traveling for a while, citing the need to visit relatives in a nearby town. No one questioned him. They trusted Thomas, knowing he was a man of integrity. On the morning of their departure, Thomas stood at the edge of his property, looking back at the farm that had been his home for decades. It was bittersweet, leaving behind the only life he'd ever known. But as Eldrin nudged him gently, urging him forward, Thomas felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about helping a friend reclaim his destiny. As they set off down the winding dirt path, leading away from the village, Thomas couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. Would they succeed in breaking the curse? And if they did, what would become of Eldrin and of him? These questions lingered in his mind, but for now he focused on the road ahead, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. Little did Thomas know the trials would push him to his limits, testing not only his physical strength but also his character. Each step of the journey would bring new revelations, forcing him to confront parts of himself he had long ignored. But one thing was certain: the bond between man and horse would grow stronger with every obstacle they overcame, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness can lead to extraordinary outcomes. The first trial began sooner than Thomas expected. As he and Eldrin ventured deeper into the wilderness, leaving behind the familiar sights of his village, they came across a towering mountain that loomed ahead like a sleeping giant. The air grew colder as they climbed higher, and the path became steeper and more treacherous with each step. Eldrin explained that the trial of Earth required them to retrieve a crystal buried deep within the roots of an ancient tree at the mountain's summit. "This crystal is no ordinary stone," Eldrin said, his voice resonating in Thomas's mind. "It holds the essence of the Earth itself, a fragment of life and strength. To break the curse, we must bring it back." Thomas nodded, determination etched on his weathered face. Though he wasn't young anymore, his years of farming had given him endurance, and his resolve was stronger than ever. They pressed onward, navigating narrow ledges and rocky terrain. At times, the wind howled so fiercely that Thomas had to cling to Eldrin's mane just to stay upright. Despite the danger, Eldrin moved with surprising agility, guiding Thomas safely through the most perilous sections of the climb. After hours of relentless effort, they finally reached the summit. There, standing tall against the sky, was the ancient tree Eldrin had spoken of. Its gnarled branches twisted upward like arms reaching for the heavens, and its trunk was wider than any tree Thomas had ever seen. Roots snaked out from the base, burrowing deep into the ground like veins connecting the tree to the heart of the mountain. Eldrin stopped near the tree and lowered his head. "The crystal lies beneath the largest root. You must dig it out." Thomas grabbed his shovel from the pack and knelt beside the massive root. The soil was hard and compact, frozen solid by the altitude and cold. Each strike of the shovel sent sharp jolts through his arms, but he refused to give up. Hours passed and sweat dripped down his brow despite the freezing temperature. Just as his muscles began to ache unbearably, the tip of the shovel struck something solid. He dropped to his knees, brushing away the dirt with his hands until the crystal emerged, glowing faintly with an inner light. "It's beautiful," Thomas whispered, holding the crystal up to the sunlight. It pulsed gently, as if alive, and warmth spread through his fingers where he touched it. Eldrin let out a soft neigh, signaling their success, and together they descended the mountain, the first trial complete. The second trial took them to a flooded cavern hidden deep within a dense forest. The entrance was partially submerged, surrounded by murky water that gave off an eerie green glow. Eldrin hesitated before stepping inside, his ears twitching nervously. "This is the trial of water," he said. "We must retrieve a pearl guarded by the spirit of the river, but beware. The currents are treacherous and the spirit does not take kindly to intruders." As they waded into the cavern, the water rose quickly, soon reaching Thomas's chest. The air was damp and heavy, filled with the sound of dripping echoes. Torches mounted on the walls flickered weakly, casting dancing shadows across the jagged rocks. In the center of the cavern stood a pedestal, and atop it rested the pearl, shimmering with an ethereal brilliance. But as they approached, the water began to churn violently. A figure emerged, a serpentine creature made entirely of liquid, its eyes glowing like molten gold. The river spirit hissed, circling them menacingly. "Who dares disturb my domain?" it demanded, its voice echoing like waves crashing against stone. "We mean no harm," Thomas called out, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "We seek only the pearl, to aid us in breaking a curse." The spirit paused, studying them with unblinking eyes. "Prove your worth, then," it said, lashing out with a powerful wave that knocked Thomas off his feet. He splashed into the water, struggling to keep his head above the surface. Eldrin dove in without hesitation, using his powerful body to push Thomas toward the pedestal. Together they fought against the current, inching closer to the pearl. When they finally reached it, Thomas grabbed the pearl and held it aloft. The spirit recoiled, its form wavering uncertainly. "You have shown courage and unity," it admitted, grudgingly. "Take the pearl and leave this place." With the pearl secured in their possession, they exited the cavern, both drenched and exhausted, but victorious. Eldrin nudged Thomas affectionately, pride evident in his gaze. The final trial awaited them in a desolate valley scorched black by endless flames. The air shimmered with heat, and the ground cracked underfoot, revealing veins of molten rock below. At the center of the valley stood a spectral phoenix, its feathers blazing with fire that never burned out. This was the trial of fire. 2. Claim the feather of rebirth. You must prove your resilience and selflessness, Eldrin warned. The phoenix will test not only your strength but also your heart. As they approached, the phoenix let out a deafening screech, spreading its fiery wings wide. Flames erupted around them, forming a circle that trapped them inside. "What do you seek here, mortals?" the phoenix asked, its voice crackling like embers. "We seek the feather of rebirth to break a curse," Thomas replied, shielding his face from the intense heat. "Please, we mean no disrespect." The phoenix tilted its head, considering his words. Then with a flash of fire, it transformed into a human-like figure cloaked in flames. "To earn the feather, one of you must make a sacrifice," it declared. "Only through loss can true renewal be achieved." Thomas and Eldrin exchanged a glance, understanding immediately what was being asked. Without hesitation, Thomas stepped forward. "Take me," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "I'll give my life if it means breaking the curse." But before the phoenix could respond, Eldrin pushed past Thomas, placing himself directly in front of the fiery figure. "No," Eldrin's voice echoed in Thomas's mind. "He has already sacrificed enough. Take me instead." The phoenix studied them both, its flaming eyes narrowing. After a moment, it nodded approvingly. "Your bond proves your worth. Neither of you shall perish today." With a sweep of its wing, it plucked a single feather from its body and handed it to Thomas. "Use this wisely." The flames subsided, and the valley returned to calm. Clutching the feather, Thomas turned to Eldrin, overwhelmed with gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I chose to," Eldrin replied simply, "for friendship and for hope." With all three artifacts in hand, they prepared to return home, ready to confront the final step in breaking the curse. Through these trials, Thomas had learned invaluable lessons about courage, trust, and the power of selflessness. And though the journey had been difficult, he knew it had brought him and Eldrin closer than ever before. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. When Thomas and Eldrin returned to the farm, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The journey had been long and grueling, but they carried with them the crystal of earth, the pearl of water, and the feather of fire. Each artifact glowing faintly, pulsing with energy as if alive. They had completed the trials, but the final step remained, breaking the curse that bound Eldrin to his mortal form. Eldrin led Thomas to the highest hill on the property, a place where the land stretched out endlessly before them. It was quiet here, untouched by the noise of daily life, and the air felt charged with anticipation. As they stood side by side, Eldrin turned to face Thomas, his eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, a sense of closure. "This is where it ends," Eldrin said, his voice resonating in Thomas's mind. "Place the artifacts together, and the curse will be undone. Thomas nodded, kneeling to arrange the items in a triangle on the grass. The crystal, the pearl, and the feather began to hum softly, their lights growing brighter until they merged into a single radiant beam that shot toward the heavens. The ground trembled beneath their feet and the wind picked up, swirling around them like a vortex. For a moment everything seemed suspended in time, the world holding its breath. Then, with a flash of blinding light, the transformation began. Eldrin's body shimmered, his horse-like features dissolving into a luminous figure clad in armor made of starlight. His mane became flowing robes, and his hooves transformed into boots etched with intricate patterns. When the light faded, the majestic being standing before Thomas bore no resemblance to the frail horse he had once known. "You've done it," Eldrin said, his voice now rich and resonant, carrying the weight of centuries. "The curse is broken." Thomas stared at him, tears welling up in his eyes. He wanted to say something, anything, but words failed him. Instead, he simply smiled, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had accomplished together. Eldrin knelt before him, bowing low. "You have given me back my freedom, Thomas. In return, I shall grant you a gift, one that will ensure your future is as bright as your spirit." Raising his hand, he touched the ground gently, and a wave of golden light spread outward, enveloping the entire farm. The soil grew richer, the crops taller and healthier. Even the animals seemed invigorated, their coats gleaming and their movements lively. "The land will always prosper under your care," Eldrin continued. "And though I must leave this realm now, know that our bond will never fade." Thomas swallowed hard, trying to process everything. "Will I ever see you again?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eldrin smiled warmly, placing a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "In ways you may not expect. My essence will remain tied to this land, watching over it and over you. You'll feel my presence in the rustling leaves, the flowing rivers, and the warmth of the sun." With those final words, Eldrin stepped back, his form beginning to dissolve into particles of light. He raised his arms, and the particles ascended into the sky, merging with the stars above. Within moments, he was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of fresh rain and the lingering feeling of peace. In the days that followed, Thomas noticed subtle changes all around him. The farm thrived like never before, requiring minimal effort on his part. The weather was kinder, the seasons more predictable. Neighbors marveled at his success, often stopping by to ask for advice or simply to admire the beauty of his land. Yet despite the newfound prosperity, Thomas couldn't shake the bittersweet ache of losing Eldrin. Still, he found comfort in knowing that Eldrin's spirit lived on, not just in the land, but in the lessons he had learned during their journey. Courage, wisdom, selflessness, and trust. These were the qualities that had guided them through the trials, and they were the same qualities Thomas now embodied. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset, he felt a gentle breeze brush against his cheek. It wasn't cold, but warm, like a familiar embrace. He closed his eyes, letting the moment wash over him, and when he opened them again, he swore he saw a faint glimmer of light dancing among the stars. From that day forward, Thomas shared the story of Eldrin with anyone who visited his farm. He told them of the magical horse who had once been a guardian spirit, of the trials they had faced together, and of the bond that transcended mortality. Some listened with wide-eyed wonder, while others dismissed it as an old man's fanciful tale. But Thomas didn't mind. He knew the truth, and that was enough. As years passed, the legend of the farmer and the enchanted steed spread far beyond the village, whispered in taverns and retold by storytellers. People spoke of the man whose kindness had broken a centuries-old curse and restored balance to the land. And though Thomas eventually grew too old to work the fields, he passed the farm down to his grandchildren, ensuring that the legacy of Eldrin would endure for generations to come. On the hill where the curse had been broken, a single silver flower bloomed each spring, a reminder of the extraordinary bond between a humble farmer and the noble spirit who had changed his life forever. To those who believed, it was proof that even the smallest acts of compassion could unlock doors to worlds beyond imagination. And so, the story of Thomas and Eldrin became more than just a tale. It became a symbol of hope, a testament to the magic hidden in everyday kindness, and a reminder that sometimes the most incredible journeys begin with the simplest choices.